George Armstrong Custer was one of the most vilified and maligned, yet revered figures in American history. His battlefield exploits in the Civil War made him nationally famous. He was promoted to the brevet rank of Brigadier General at the tender age of 23. At 36, he was killed on June 25, 1876, on Last Stand Hill to battle Little Bighorn. It's been alleged that Custer was a glory-seeking madman, but was he? Today on The Vantage Point, we're going to take a look at why there was a march to the Little Bighorn Valley and to see if Custer demonstrated any raving madness traits on the trail. I hope you'll join me. As mentioned in a number of books and videos, the Battle of the Little Bighorn was a consequence of a major spring and summer initiative or offensive to force bands of non-treaty Northern Cheyenne, Hunkpapa, Minneconjou, Santee, Ogallala, and other Lakota villages to return to their respective agencies. Of principal concern to the Grant administration were the non-treaty bands of Sioux who left their sprawling agency in South Dakota. For Sitting Bull and other war chiefs like Crazy Horse, they were especially put off by the U.S. government's lack of commitment to the 1868 treaty that set aside those lands, including their sacred Black Hills. The government's changing commitment to respect the treaty was set in motion by the discovery of gold in those hills. In 1874, Custer was assigned the job of leading an expedition to survey the Black Hills in search of gold. The suspicion that gold was hidden in the earth of those uplands was created by numerous natives who exchanged gold nuggets for goods at army posts. To the dismay of Sitting Bull and other native leaders, gold was found. As with other discoveries of the precious metal, the news of its detection spread like a spring flood. Gold miners besieged the region, and while the 7th Cavalry ran off more than a handful of white miners, and black miners too, from the Black Hills, their numbers were large enough to settle a town. Deadwood, South Dakota traces its origin to that time and purpose. For the Lakota, there was a good reason to cherish the rugged tree-covered uplands. The hills gave them refuge from the cold, biting winds that blew across the high plains during the long Dakota winters. The ample supply of trees also provided the natives with fuel for cooking, heat, poles for teepees and travois, and materials to fashion bows and arrows. Although they're a Siouan people, like the Lakota and the Hunkpapa, the Crow were allied to the U.S. Army. The Crow didn't want other tribes killing off game that foraged on their Montana prairie. Nope. The Arikara were not cultural relatives to the Siouan peoples. Like the Crow, however, they were allied to the U.S. government. Being from lands in what is today North Dakota, Arikara scouts like Bloody Knife, who was Custer's favorite, were not as familiar with the rolling landscape dissected by the Rosebud, Bighorn, Little Bighorn, Powder, and Yellowstone rivers as were the Crow Scouts. Among the more important Crow Scouts were White Man Runs Him, Curly, Goes Ahead, and Harry Moccasin. Both the Crow and Arikara were well represented among the 45 Native Scouts that accompanied the 7th Cavalry in May and June of 1876. Custer had a trusting relationship with the Scouts. Major Marcus Reno and Captain Frederick Benteen were the two highest ranking officers under him. But despite not liking each other, they were united in their disdain for George Armstrong Custer. However, Custer was held in high esteem by other officers under him. One of his most trusted officers was Tom Custer, that name rings a bell, the general's brother who had won 2 Medals of Honor in the Civil War. Captain Thomas Weir, Captain George Yates, Captain Miles Moylan, Captain Miles Keogh, Lieutenant Charles Varnum, Lieutenant Algernon Smith, Lieutenant Edward Godfrey, and Lieutenant James Calhoun, Custer's brother-in-law. These men made up a large part of Custer's loyal officer corps and his social network too. As a practitioner of nepotism, Custer's brother Boston was among the civilian employees accompanying the 7th in the spring of 1876. While camped out at the Rosebud-Yellowstone confluence, General Alfred Terry and his staff devised a pincer move to trap Sitting Bull's wandering Sioux village somewhere in southern Montana between the Powder and Little Missouri rivers. Terry, who was a senior officer at Fort Abraham Lincoln, a sprawling, windswept outpost located near Bismarck on the banks of the Missouri River, approached from the east with 1,200 men. Custer and 12 companies of the 7th Cavalry made up about half of Terry's Dakota column. The southern pincer was led by General George Crook, who was to ride out of Fort Fetterman, Wyoming with 993 troopers and over 200 Crow and Shoshone scouts. With a smaller command of 400 troopers, Colonel John Gibbon and his Montana column left Fort Ellis and advanced from the west along the Yellowstone River. As a cavalry officer, Custer reckoned that he was able to move quicker than the infantry. Although General Terry offered Custer wagons of supplies and Gatling guns, they were respectfully refused. He argued that those cumbersome items would only slow him down. He reminded General Terry that the 7th was chasing a highly mobile fighting force, that he was told numbered between 800 and 1,000 warriors. General Terry gave permission to Custer, however, to alter his plans if he saw fit. Terry had calculated that the pincers, led by Gibbon himself, and Custer, who would most likely link up with Crook's forces on the 25th or 26th, would present an impressive force that, when faced with it, the Sioux would capitulate and agree to return to their agencies. As Custer and his troopers followed an increasingly large Lakota and Cheyenne trail, the general adjusted his estimate of the fighting force he was destined to engage. Despite Terry's estimate of 800 to 1,000 warriors, Custer was already considering that they would encounter 1,500 or more armed natives and their families under the charismatic sway of Sitting Bull. After the 7th Cavalry left Terry's command on the 22nd, Custer told those in attendance at an officers' conference that he believed that they were chasing 1,500 warriors or more. The evidence they found on the trail convinced him that Terry's estimate was too low. The scouts certainly agreed. They believed that they would encounter an unusually large village. As they saw the situation, the number of fire rings used in temporary camps and ground marks left by ponies pulling travois suggested that they would meet at least 1,500 warriors. Because of a noon departure and poorly packed mules, the 7th covered only 12 miles on the first day's march, but averaged 30 miles per day on the 23rd and 24th. As evidence of a large body of Sioux grew stronger on the 24th, Custer drove his fatigued troopers and their dusty, sweaty mounts through the dark of night. According to Lieutenant Godfrey, the command set up camp twice, once briefly at 11:30 p.m. and then again at 2 a.m. Lieutenant Charles Varnum and his scouts went ahead of the command to the Crow's Nest in the Wolf Mountains. That's a promontory. And they arrived there before dawn. Once the scouts determined that camp smoke and ponies were visible in the Little Bighorn Valley, they sent for Custer. The general arrived at 10 a.m. With field glasses in hand, Custer gazed northward from the promontory and into the Little Bighorn Valley. Despite his inability to make out the sprawling village, Varnum and Bloody Knife assured the general that they were looking at a large Sioux village located some 15 miles away. Having found his prey, the trail-weary cavalry officer was prepared to settle in for a day's rest and launch a dawn attack. After all, Terry and Gibbon, as well as Crook, who had to be within just a few miles of his location, would be in the valley the next day. The short-lived plan to get some needed rest was soon rejected, however. It's important to point out that the change of plans was in response to intelligence reports, not glory-bound whims, of the general. If anything, Custer was visibly concerned about the challenges they faced. He was not drunk with ambition, nor did he see blood in his eyes. Custer also knew that the American people were divided on Indian conflicts, which, in his autobiography published 2 years earlier, he suggested that few officers want to be vilified by as many people as those who offered him victory laurels. Also, Lieutenant Godfrey claimed that after an officer's call on the evening of the 22nd, Godfrey walked back to his tent with Lieutenant George D. Wallace. Wallace told his friend, and I quote, he believed General Custer would be killed because he had never heard him talk as he did or his manner so subdued, end of quote. Godfrey did not disagree with Wallace. In reality, Custer's decision to speed up the attack was put in motion by Arikara and Crow scouts, who claimed that Sioux warriors had seen their camp smoke and would flee. They did their best to convince Custer that the 7th had to attack immediately. Despite their intense pleas, Custer insisted on resting another 20 hours to deliver a dawn attack. But when reports came to Custer that Sioux warriors had been spotted rummaging through boxes of hardtack and ammunition that had fallen off of poorly packed mules, he gave the order to attack. Folks, I'm a little hard-pressed to find an instance or evidence where Custer demonstrated any level of madness and blind ambition between the time when he left General Terry's command on the 22nd and when he made the decision to attack. What do you think? If you enjoyed this brief talk, hit the like button and share it with your friends. And please let me know if you'd like to hear about the rest of the Battle of Little Bighorn. I'll see you next time here on The Vantage Point. Bye-bye. God bless.